Hey guys, and we are back with another Elite Coach Live, and we're back with the main man, Mr. Brendan Chaplin. We finally pinned him down after he's been here, there, and everywhere doing great things. But as always, guys, whether you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, watching us on LinkedIn or on Facebook, please do make sure that you like our page. Make sure you subscribe so you get notified every single time we go live and every time we upload a new podcast onto the feed, so you don't miss out on some of this great information that we're going to be sharing with you. So, first and foremost, Brendan, how we doing, mate?
Really good, thanks, Steve. Yeah, good, thanks. And nice to be back online. Been a few weeks. So, yeah, looking forward to getting into some stuff today. It's going to be fun.
Defo, mate, defo. Well, like I say, it's good to have you back, and we've got some other good, great guests coming up as well. So, as always, guys, though, as well, any comments, any questions, feel free to drop them in, and we'll get them answered for you. So, today, guys, we're going to be chatting about something me and Brendan have discussed quite a bit in the past, not online, offline, just as we just chat about training and stuff like that, and it's this argument that sometimes crops up of intensity versus frequency. Now, I've got my own opinions on it. Brendan's going to sort of dig into his. But do you want to sort of kick us off, mate, on just what's your thoughts on the old intensity versus frequency, and which do you feel is the best for a training program, mate?
So, yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because, as always, it's going to depend on your outcome that you're seeking. And example, if you're training for an ultra marathon, it's very different to training for Olympic weightlifting, 1 rep. So there's no doubt about it that you need both of these qualities in a program. And I think for me, we talk frequency. That's not the same as volume. So volume is a third term that enters the discussion here, but frequency is about how regularly you expose yourself to either volume or intensity, from my perspective. So for beginners, for newbies, frequency is the game. Building a habit, to be quite honest with you, Steve. And I would always choose. I always think that the key mantra as a coach and for your programming, to enter your programming, is what adaptations are you seeking? Number one, and secondly, the goal is to get that person coming back for the next session, not to achieve your goal in this session. So how do you design your session to allow somebody to come back for the next session? And the bottom line is, what's intense for me is not necessarily intense for you, and what's high volume for me is not necessarily high volume for you. So we have to come back to the principle of individualization here as well. Where is that person on their journey? I'll let you jump in a second, but I think really broad brushstroke here, Steve, for me is the earlier you are in your training journey, if you like, the more immature you are in your training journey, the more frequency is going to be important. The more you need to touch the physical qualities on a regular basis. The more used to that, the more mature you are, the more the principle of accumulation applies, and that you don't necessarily need to touch those qualities in quite the same level of frequency, and intensity starts to become more relevant there. And your tolerance of intensity improves a little bit too. So you actually need more intensity to get the adaptations that you seek. So I think they both work hand in hand, and they are both really important, along with volume, for certain populations and outcomes that we're working with, Steve. What about you?
Yeah, I think, like I say, it's like old answer that always comes up. It depends, right? And I think
Yes.
ultimately, completely right. The frequency element is it's mitigating the fatigue and the actual what's going on with the intensity. I think people try and jump to too high of intensity too soon. So I think what people try and do is they jump in, hit a really hard session on a Monday, and then they're just done for the rest of the week. Say for
Yeah.
squats, deadlifts, whatever it may be. You
Yeah.
know, even if it's like a fast 5K run or a fast 10K run, they try and hit it. And then the rest of the week, there's just that residual fatigue, DOMS. They're just not getting as much out of it. And it is always about that tipping point. I think for me, it's like I say, if you've got an athlete who is got a relatively low training age, so that's less than 8 months of structured training, just use that minimal effective dose, but give them a dose every single day.
Yeah.
And then over time, once they've sort of reached a certain parameters, they've sort of ticking certain boxes that you like, they're able to achieve 20 reps of a body weight push up. They're able to start pulling their own body weight for 20 reps or whatever it may be on inverted rows, or they're starting to get good movement patterns with an empty bar or an overhead squat for 20 reps. Then that's the tipping point to say, right, we can go from 5, 6 sessions a week. We can then start to scale it a little bit and go to 4 sessions a week,
Yes.
but we're going to start increasing the intensity a little bit. But the key thing that I think we need to consider here as well, when you go from frequency and you start applying the intensity, you also need to shift your intensity into the recovery modalities. And I think that's where a lot of people miss out as well. I get great results from high frequency, but I think what it does is because I train high frequency, it actually speeds up my recovery in between because of obviously hormonal response, blood flow, etc., all of that boring stuff.
Yeah.
But if you've got an athlete who's hitting it high intensity, you need to make sure that there's as much intensity on the recovery protocols as well. And that's kind of my kind of take on it is that's why it's important to have those barriers, those right, what is an acceptable level before my athlete moves on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, talking specifics then on this, I think if you've got general population clients that are trying to get in shape, or they're in shape and they just want to kind of sharpen the saw a little bit there, I think you need to build more frequency in, generally speaking, and dose people up on a regular basis. And that's where, I've talked about it before, like the Dan John one lift a day gives you exposure to intensity and a good level of frequency. If you took those one lift a day and put them into 2 days, that's a completely different scenario. Even though at the end of the week the work complete is the same, right? And that's, for me now, I find that I've talked about this one again, the whole two and move thing, 2 lifts, and then I do some movement, some rowing, some running, some mobility, whatever it may be, works for me. I've sort of found that sweet spot in there of regular, frequent exposure to intensity, but not too much intensity.
Mm.
And I think that sort of exposure and that structure works for general population. They don't need a lot of time in the gym. They don't need to be blasting themselves with unbelievable volume for hours and hours and hours on a daily, weekly basis. They just need really good habits and to hit the gym or to hit some kind of movements on a really regular basis, don't they?
Yeah, and this is why I always try and break it down. And we've talked about this on the movement, strength, and power immersion session we do for the SCE students. Um, and we talk about chunking your sessions down into 5, 10 minute, 15-minute chunks. And I think one, it keeps the focus, it keeps the goal the main goal, but it allows you to manipulate the volume, the intensity within that specific block. So, for example, somebody who's just starting, the goal, and we've discussed it many times, is work capacity of just being able to do a flow warm up, constant movement for 20 minutes. And then that strength block might literally be 10 minutes long. And it might be 5 by 5, 5 reps every 2 minutes on the 2 minutes, 5 sets, and that's it. That's your lot. And your rest of it is your recovery and regeneration stuff. And that might be a 10-minute window. But you add that together, and that's a 40, 45-minute session. That's how much it needs to be. Do you know?
Yeah. And this is where, general preparedness is also a consideration here. Like, again, something that I've talked a lot about in the past. If you look back at some of the resources of like warm-ups revamped and the combat performance training and some of those products of mine, one of the key things that I try and get over the first few months or so of working with anybody, it could be an elite athlete, it could be a complete beginner, is that ability to work continuously for around about an hour. But that's not lifting 90% efforts, every 2 minutes for an hour. That's a general level of preparedness that facilitates working well and productively for 1 hour ish. And that comes fairly quickly with frequency, because if you think about it, if you're doing, let's take some really basic stuff. If you're doing a 5 or 10 minute warm up, you get yourself a TheraBand, you're doing some squats, you're doing some calisthenics and a bit of, corrective or movement work. Then you then throw in, say, 4 or 5 sets of pull-ups, 4 or 5 sets of pushing in there, and maybe a lower body movement. That doesn't take too long if you set the clock on it. And then you're doing 20 minutes of endurance, what I call the move part of my own training at the moment, whether it's a walk, a run, a weighted walk, a row, you choose, swim. Before you know it, you're building up circa 60 minutes of work in there. But that can take time to do that. It depends on your starting point. And over a period of months, you're then in a place where, kind of without realizing it, you're a hell of a lot fitter and more prepared than you were. And so now you can start introducing a greater level of intensity, and the volume of intensity can increase off the back of that as well. So I kind of see that as phase one is, where are you at? Can you hit 60 minutes of just good quality movement, and you've got the work capacity to do that? I'm not thinking about intensity at all at this point. And then phase two would be, right, let's gradually layer in some intensity here into that relative to you. When we get into, say, professional rugby players, good example, they're not on phase one or two. They're coming in at pre-season, maybe the back end of phase two, and they've got a good level. And more experienced players, they've got a higher level of accumulated volume, accumulated training, and they can return to those levels much, much more efficiently and quickly than somebody that hasn't accumulated that over a period of years, right? So, this is all about looking at who are you dealing with, what's the training background, and what are they like as a person? The classic sort of piano player versus piano pusher. Are you going to fry that person really, really quickly with high doses versus somebody who's really tolerant of those high doses as well? That's your piano pusher versus your piano player, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, and ultimately, if you look at any sort of high-level athlete, you might be thinking, oh, well, they push in massive amount of weight, or they're performing at such a high intensity, etc. But if you look at the training they do throughout a week, there's a lot of frequency there. You know, if you look at the professional rugby in season, they might have 4 gym sessions a week, 3 or 4 gym sessions a week, but then you've got games-based training, then you've got units on top of that, and
Yeah.
it's the intensity is all high low, because obviously units is very, very low intensity, right? But that's their work capacity still building up, and then you've got your game base, which is your specific capacity, which again tends to be stop start, you know. So I think people need to have that consideration. And I always think when you come to high frequency, always apply the high low model for me. And when you start applying some of the intensity, so try and have a high day and then make sure you have a low day. And that's something that's always worked really, really well for me. And you look at track athletes, their low day isn't just sort of sat round foam rolling. It's 20, 30 minutes of hurdle drills, med ball circuits, all of these types of things. So you need to take that into consideration when it comes into frequency. You're not really going to be overtraining. I think this notion of, oh, I want to try and avoid overtraining, so I'll train less, is not actually the right play. It's about manipulating the intensity along the frequency you're doing, because if you don't have the frequency, if you have a headache, you don't take the full packet of ibuprofen, and then that's it. You take enough to get away, and then if you've got continued medication, you might take a higher dose, lower dose, or you just constantly take the same dose over a prolonged period of time. You know, so I think that's the next piece of me. Once that fork meets the road in terms of, right, I've done a good enough block, I've got my general prep phase there, then I need to start thinking about what's my long-term goal or what am I working towards. Because you've got that, it allows you to do a concentrated block and be able to hit that with relative ease. So for obviously using yourself, Brendan, sometimes you'll go for that, right, do you know what? I'm going to smash my 5K times. You're ready to do that. Or you can turn around and say, I want to actually get strong. I'm just going to do a little strength block. You're never going to have to build into that. You're always ready to achieve on that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And listening to your body, listening to your mind is key as well. So you might not feel like you're ready to do your 5K, but when you get out there, you feel great, and you then set your timer and say, right, it's on. I'm gonna have a go here. And the opposite as well. You have the right to overrule that. But ultimately, it's like, what's the phrase, isn't it? The harder you work, the luckier you get. The more you put sessions together and the more you do quality work, the more you have more opportunities where you think, I feel great, I feel really good here. And that is that early phase of building frequency, building habits, building work capacity that comes through that. And then stringing together units into one session might be a really, really good option for you. But similarly, we know that, you know, if you're going to do, say, speed work, movement work, you really don't need long for those sessions. They're 20-minute blocks. And same with mobility training and so on and so forth. So do you do your mobility work for 20 minutes, then your speed work for 20 minutes, then your strength work for 20 minutes? It's probably not the best solution when it comes to the adaptations you're seeking, but the practicalities, many great athletes have been built doing 90-minute, 2-hour blocks of 6 to 8 units strung together. You know, when I was in the States training with Boyle at Boyle's place, that's how elite athletes trained there. You know, they came in and they did 2.5 hours, but it wasn't 2.5 hours of 90% strength efforts. It was probably no more than 30 to 40 minutes of combined strength training. And then the rest of it was strung on mobility work, restoration work, plyometrics, speed training, and so on and so forth. But if you throw somebody into a 2-hour block like that, that doesn't have the background and doesn't have the fitness, they're just not going to be able to execute any of that with good quality, and you'll blow that person out. So for me, it's frequency stretched out through the weeks, through the days, multiple training units. You can then choose to bring them together to put more work in when your fitness and general preparation levels are higher. And obviously, in accordance with that person, you're not going to achieve that with athletes that are training for 20-second efforts. They're probably never going to train in concentrated 2-hour blocks like a rugby union player would, because their tolerance to volume is less genetically, and frankly doesn't need to be the same level as those athletes, Steve, does it?
No, it is a law, that law of adaptation. It's it's the same principle all over. So you've got to have that consideration there. I think the key thing from this, guys, is when you're looking at it from a coach's point of view, sometimes we get scared of the frequency of training because you're going to overtrain. You're only going to overtrain if you don't manage the intensity well enough and you don't manage the recovery. And actually, I think sometimes it's very easy to undertrain your athletes, and you can scratch your head and go, why do they keep on breaking down when they get to a certain point? And it's actually, they probably haven't had enough exposure in the first place. And this was my issue with a lot of people that I had when I did the 75 hard challenge, and that was 2 workouts a day every single day for 75 days. The amount of nonsense I used to hear from people say, oh, you'll overtrain, you're asking for injury, you're going to break down. And I'm like, I'm doing 2 45-minute sessions a day. I'm not sort of doing 1 rep max in all session, every single session, So I think we need to respect how durable the body is and never shy away from frequency, as long as you do it in a strategic manner, because if you do it that way, it will help you get the most out of it, and actually it will pay dividends further down the line. Like I use it with the track athletes all the time. They'll go to the track, they'll get the hurdles out, and it is literally 30 to 40 minutes, very low intensity. You're lucky if the heart rate gets above 120, because I make sure they monitor it during these low sessions, and it's just hurdle drills. It literally is hurdle drills, and that is just dynamic mobility. But if they do that 3-4 times a week, that's 90 minutes to 2 hours of mobility. They don't need to sit at home in front of the TV doing yoga and all of this type of stuff, because it's specific mobility to what they need for their sport. So I think the key thing is don't be scared of frequency. As coaches, we need it, but know that there's the right time to apply the intensity as well. Intensity needs to be there, 100%.
Yeah, but that's and your example about the 75 hard there. I think the thing is your general level is high because you've had many years of training with high volume and good levels of intensity, and you've got a good springboard there to move into something that would otherwise be very challenging. But you're listening to your body there. We talked while you were doing that, and some of those sessions was a walk. Nothing wrong with that. That is a session for some people, especially you can turn a walk into a really tough session if you want. So it's all relative. And similarly, the mobility training, if you put somebody that's 60 years old that's not done anything for the last 20 years through that 30 minutes of hurdles, that they're going to be bailing, they're going to be ruined. And that's where that person needs to be doing 5 minutes of dynamic mobility into a couple of bodyweight exercises, and then into a kind of really steady rowing or bike movement session or something like that. And over the next sort of 3, 6, 9, 12 months, they can build up a level of work capacity that they can do a 30-minute mobility work, which for that athletics athlete is a genuine warm-up, because they've got the level of work capacity that's stacked up to facilitate that being a warm-up and not a session. So again, it's everything can be a warm-up for somebody and a session for somebody else. Everything can be low intensity for someone and high intensity for somebody else. And that's where good coaches can build sessions. But I do think that the question here is which is best for a training program. I think frequency first, free exposure to movement first, and then the brain unlocks new things that you didn't even know existed. And suddenly something that was really, really intense is now moderately intense and can be built in a bit more of a concentrated fashion, you know?
Yeah, 100% agree. And again, you just need to look at the research, and it supports that. It backs it up. It's better from a psychological level. You can dip into all of what's happening on a physiological level as well as a psychological level, and it just works. So never be scared to suggest that, you know, because I think sometimes it's all that you're a beginner. You just need to do 2 full body sessions a week. That's fine. It'll get you started. It's actually the reverse. You know, like 2 sessions a week of real high intensity for an elite level athlete is probably going to be enough. You know, and your people in the beginning phase, that's the frequency. So, like I say, which is best for a training program? It depends on the level of the athlete. But I think sometimes coaches can get it in reverse and try and go intensity with low frequency too early on, and it costs them further down the line.
Yeah. Good point.
Good. Yep. Good stuff. Good stuff. So, guys, I really hope you enjoyed that. I obviously we enjoyed chatting training and stuff like that. Oh, I forgot to ask you, Brendan, do you want to fill the guys in how your recent running event went? Was it the Leeds 10K you were doing, mate?
Yeah, I did the Leeds 10K, and yeah, it was good. It was a new route that they had this year. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. That's never the word for me that springs to mind. Like, I find it amazing at the end of these races when you speak to people and I loved that. Oh, what an amazing, it's like, yeah, I despised it from 100 meters from the start line till I got my bottle of water at the end. But no, it was good. I enjoy putting my body through some of these things and the mind as well. And the time was okay, not quite where I wanted it to be, but I didn't have a great sleep the night before, which does have an impact, doesn't it? So, all in all, happy, Ste. And actually, like, frequency and the running side it has really improved for me. My tolerance to intensity on the running has improved through the frequency that I have managed to build now. And it's uncommon for me to not do kind of 3 or 4 running doses a week now. One would be a length, one would be a speed, one would be somewhere in between, and then there'll be another one in there depending on how I feel. So yeah, it's going well, and I do think my brain has unlocked a new level of running capacity for me in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, which is quite cool as well.
Nice, mate. Nice.
Yeah.
And wasn't it the same weekend you did that? You had a mate who did a 24-hour endurance race, which just made us feel all awful about our levels of fitness.
Absolutely, yeah. No, he did a 24-hour enduro challenge and ran 90 miles over the 24 hours. His running partner did over 100. I think he did 105 miles. So yeah, very, very impressive and different mindset. Very different mindset. He's a good runner, but that's not really about running. That's about mental strength to achieve something like that. because how do you train for something like that? You're not going out and building up to 90 miles by doing 70 the week before and 50 the week. That would burn you out.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things are a 10-year journey to achieve that kind of output. And that's kind of where he's at. So it'll be interesting to see what comes next for him.
Yeah. So you heard it here first, guys. Brendan's going to be his mate's running partner on the next 24-hour challenge. All right.
I'll be on my bike.
Pedaling in the opposite direction, far away.
Yeah, that's it.
Right, guys, absolute pleasure. Brendan, I really enjoyed that, mate. Thanks for giving up your time. And as always, guys, hit the like, share it if you thought this was a useful session. Make sure you subscribe to us on all the platforms that you're watching and consume our content. It really does help us make sure that the messages we put out reach you on a regular basis, so we can support you in your journey of becoming the elite coach you want to become. So until next time, guys, have a great one. Brendan, pleasure as always, and we'll catch up again very, very soon.
Thanks, Steve.